My name is Joe Woodham from Tory. Welcome to our vlog series on all things design. Today it's my pleasure of speaking with Ioanis Hristodoulou, seasoned UX research strategist with over 10 years experience designing and leading research practices for some of Australia's most well-known and successful scale-ups, Culture Amp and Envato. He's skilled at developing research strategies, leading high-performance teams and providing data-driven insights to influence product decisions. Ioanis, I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more about your background. How are you today?
I'm good, Joe. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to chat to you all things research.
My pleasure. Yeah, keen to find out a little bit more about your background and your experience. Can you give us a bit of background into yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I've been in the design/research game for probably about 15 or so years. And about half of that time, the first half was spent in sort of design land. So I was a designer originally. Then the second half, I then moved into research. And I think as a designer, I was always probably a bit more leaning towards that discovery kind of strength anyway. Yeah, I made that transition, which I think a lot of researchers used to be designers as well. And yeah, made that transition about seven or 8 years ago. It's been great. I've been able to start up research at Envato originally, and that was a lot of fun. And then, moved to Culture Amp to start a research practice with the team, and that was a lot of fun as well.
What's been, working for some of those scale-ups, like Envato back in the day and most recently Culture Amp? So there's a lot happening in those type of environments. How was it sort of establishing UX research practice in such a fast-growing or fast-moving company?
It's pretty interesting. I think as a researcher, I think you start with an idea of what you should be doing, and from all the things that you read online, all the videos that you see, and then you go into the role and you're like, oh, this is, all things are happening all at once really quickly. And I think the challenge and the good thing is you need to kind of work out what your role is firstly and what you need to do, and chat to a lot of people to work out kind of where's the business is at the moment and where research could be best placed. And you don't really know that until you start having kind of those conversations. So I think part of working at a scale up like that is kind of connecting with as many people as possible to really understand not only where research can play best, like the types of research, but I think also like operationally, what research operation improvements should be made. Because like I think most places, if you're a researcher or if you are a team of researchers, you're not the only one doing research. You're going to have product managers and designers and others also doing research, and they will look at us as a sense of guidance and to help them out. And I think a big part of working at a scale up is being okay with that, and that's going to be part of your role as well. So yeah, if you can kind of build up those, I guess, relationships early on, it really kind of helps you at a scale up to have those allies, so that even though things are moving really quickly, you've got that kind of support around you.
Does the role evolve really quickly? I guess going to an organization maybe hasn't had much of a research function, or everyone's kind of contributing to that research function. As a dedicated researcher, does your role really evolve fast? Like the more you get across the business, the more you understand the problem areas. Does the role change really quickly?
Yeah, I think so. And it goes back to not knowing what you're in for until you kind of start. You originally might think a big strategic piece of research is maybe what is needed. And then you go in there and you see everybody's sort of scrambling to do some validation testing or some concept testing, but they don't really know how to do it. And by you spending, 20% of your energy on there will have like an 80% impact on the business. And like you need to be across that stuff and make sure that, you're having those conversations to do that. And then your role will change as it goes, I think. But once you need to kind of, from my experience, need to build that up first before you kind of get to that bigger picture kind of thinking, which is probably where you're thinking your role will kind of lead to next. Yeah, but so it's a totally an evolution. I think that's kind of the fun thing about working at any kind of scale up. Your role isn't super defined. I mean, you see all if you go on any kind of job search and you see the job descriptions of any of these research roles, they're all the same. But I guarantee you, they're all completely different once you kind of go in there. And that's kind of part of the fun of working at a scale up.
It's a bit of a skill, I guess, having the patience to sort of see the bigger picture there and not trying to jump into the big meaty projects and actually try and get those small incremental wins as you go?
I think so. And that's part of the challenge, like our challenge as researchers that we might have. I think we do need to keep one eye on, what is the strategy of the company or the product, and making sure that is sort of in your head, even when we are talking about all those smaller pieces, because every small piece, as long as it's contributing to that kind of larger vision to where the company's going, is super valuable work. And I think that one of the challenges from any researcher at a scale up is you're going to get overwhelmed with all these requests. Help me, help me, help me, help me. And you're going to need some way to prioritize that. And I've always found it helpful to be able to understand what that bigger picture is. And then that helps me to say no to certain projects a little bit easier. Because one tactical project versus another tactical project aren't necessarily, the same balance. And if one outweighs another because they're much more aligned to where the strategy is heading, then that's kind of how I've been able to manage that. Which, yeah, that's definitely a challenge, kind of working at a scale up, being able to balance that.
Is that one of the sort of more valuable lessons that you pulled away from your experience building design practices in scale-ups?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, being able to say no is so important. And I know that from personal experience, like being originally a solo practitioner at Envato, as an example, or even at Culture Amp, you say yes to all these things because you want to help out as many people as possible. And then you're drowning in work and you can't deliver at any capacity that you would like. Being able to say yes to the right things and no, or like maybe later to some of the others, is really important. I think for your own well-being as well. You want to make sure you're delivering things that are sustainable, and that's really important, because researchers, it can drain you. You're talking to all these different people from all across the world, maybe different time zones, and so you need to make sure you're balancing that with a good R&R and not kind of overdoing it.
And how do you prioritize, if I can say the word, how do you prioritize that? Like, is that linking back to what you originally said, is really understanding what the business needs, and then I guess working with different people within the business to go, all right, this isn't going to be the priority right now, move that back. How did you take that approach?
Yeah, definitely that's the way I kind of go about it. And as much as possible, visualize what our work is and what is coming up, whatever that visualization might be, whether it's calendar views or Trello boards or Gantt charts, it doesn't really matter. But having a visual that people can kind of see, this is what we're working on in the next kind of quarter or so, can make people go, okay, well, I can't get my project in right now, but, maybe in the following quarter, we can kind of make that happen. And just to help set up that expectation is really important. And I think the other thing, going back to kind of self-safety as well, is setting your own barriers, particularly if you're a researcher in Australia. We are often talking to people outside our normal time zones, sometimes part of that work, and that's okay. But it's really important to have your own personal barriers. So like whatever that might be. So for me, for example, I'm a young parent with a couple of kids. There's definitely some no-go times because of that. But you don't have to have kids to have those no-go times too. It's important for everybody to kind of have those barriers, or else I've been overworked. I've seen others get overworked, and you want to make sure that never happens as well.
Yeah, I got a wife, so she definitely sets the barriers there in terms of when I can't work, because it's very easy for me to get absorbed into things and not know when to quit. But I guess, being a researcher, how do you effectively demonstrate some of the impact of the research and the projects that you are working on back to the business or your stakeholders?
It's a great question, and I think it typically has been a challenging one for researchers to be able to do. And I think that's because of the way we are trained, right? We are trained to go about, we've got a question that we need to find out. We do the research, we share back the insights, and we move on to the next thing. And I think one of the challenges and one of the things that we need to be better as researchers is to kind of go back to our previous work. Because often when we deliver something, we will just move on to the next thing. But after we deliver something, whether, like, let's say it's a product team, they might go off and then spend, 3 or 4 months developing something, but you don't know what they're doing. You moved on to another project. So it's important for a researcher to sort of stay close-ish to like that development team to see what's going on, to also like ingrain that influence from your own research continually as part of that. But then also like being able to track back what was delivered ultimately, and then really kind of being able to link that back through your own research and say, we discovered this, and from that, we released this product, and then making sure you know what the impact of that is. whether it's like we got X amount of more revenue or whatever that might be. But I think that's a really challenging thing for researchers to do because we're so busy moving on to the next thing. But I think that's definitely something that I've tried both in my own practice, but also leading others and sharing that information back so that they know about it. And I think that's really critical as well as part of that work. So that's one thing from a project point of view. But I think also the flip of that is operationally, there's definitely ways that you can show improvements. So as I said previously, researchers aren't the only ones that do research. So if you can make any operational improvements to the way you find people, the speed you find people, how quickly projects start and end, which are all really trackable, they're all things that you can then point numbers to, like literal money numbers, to say we've saved X amount of time, X amount of dollars. That's from an operational point of view, what really, really helps, I think. But it all comes down, going back to both those examples, is tracking really well, making sure you understand your impact on your projects, but also your operations, keeping that front and center, which is so hard to do because you're in the minutiae of the work, but you got to take a step back and kind of go, what is that impact? And being able to talk to it.
A few questions. Like if I was a design researcher, I guess my question would be, what sort of cadence would you take to checking back to ensure, let's say, the product team is using your research properly and sticking to what you've presented? Like, how would you continually check back to ensure that you have the right sort of data to, I guess, inform the business of how your researchers work? But like, have you got a cadence there that you get your team to work to?
Not like set in stone. However, I think one thing that I've done in the past is every couple of weeks have a little reminder in my own calendar to go check back on X project or check back on X operational improvement, and make a little note to myself, just in, your standard kind of note-taking app, and making sure that that is being tracked over time. Because then you can tell a really great story in, like, let's say you're doing a quarterly review or sharing back, your wins for that quarter to the business. You've got all that information there ready to go. And that doesn't take a long time. It will take 5 minutes of your working week to be able to do that, to go, how did that go? Where are things at? Pop it in your notebook. And then, down the line, every quarter, you can summarize really effectively. So yeah, that's kind of what I would recommend.
Would you have like a set of data or like 5 questions that you go back and ask on your research work? Just like, have you done this, or how's this going? And just have a set of 5 questions to make it easier to template. So when you are presenting back to the business, know how to structure it.
The questions are pretty simple. It's like, why did we do this work? What was it? What was the intended impact, whatever that might be? And how did we go? And also the timeframes of that. And I think the timeframe part over time becomes really important as well. Because if you can showcase that you're doing research that's impactful, but also doing it bit more rapidly or a bit quicker for whatever reason, that really, I think, it sells the reason why people should, invest some more into, getting more resources and that kind of thing. So they're the kind of things that I look at.
Last question. What would you say the superpower of a design researcher brings to a business?
I think that's a great question. Maybe my answer is not actually research. That's not the actual superpower. So that's like the bread and butter, right? You're there to do research. You're there to bring insights and offer suggestions and make an impact in that way. But I think what I've experienced with myself and any other researcher I've worked with is you're working on many different projects across the business, across different stakeholders. You become like this weird glue within the organization of not only knowledge, but an understanding of, that person's working on that thing and that person's working on that thing. And you start connecting the dots. So I feel like as a superpower, not only will you bring insights, but you become that connector of people and knowledge, which I've seen all the time happen. And it's really exciting. So if you're thinking about hiring one, think about that as well, that, they can glue things together for you.
Interesting. And look, if I was a design researcher, how would I guess, understands my value to the business, but then also maybe communicate that so people don't just think you're there to do a research project and that's it. It's just like that you can be that weird glue across the business and connect things. How do people need to communicate that? Because like sometimes I find that communication piece is the big thing that's lacking in these sort of situations.
Yeah, I mean, and I think thankfully from a design researcher point of view, most of us probably have that skill. Like we are all pretty trained to talk to people through, interviewing or, ethnography or whatever it might be. So using your powers of communication, of just what you do in your day to day, you'll be able to do this naturally. I think the important, rule here is to not worry about just being in your own bubble, I think. And that can take some courage to kind of get out of it, but feel empowered to say, hey, I do know this information and I do know that this person needs this information. Just go ahead and kind of do it, and don't worry about that, in fact, that you're stepping on anyone's toes, because you're not. That's sort of the role that you're there to be played with. And as a researcher, sometimes that might feel uncomfortable because you might think, I delivered something, I'm just going to move on to the next thing. That's what other people's responsibilities to kind of deal with. I think my advice is lean into that a little bit more and feel comfortable in doing that, because you have the skills to talk about it. It's just actually just doing it, which is often the barrier.
Just one more question. If I was a company, and let's say we're scaling, we've already got a design practice, but we don't yet have a dedicated research team. What would your advice be to a scaling company as to why they should look at building a dedicated research practice, and how?
Yeah, that's a great question. It goes back to the original, your first question about working at a scale up and kind of understanding your role. The questions I would ask as a scale up is, how well do you know the people that you're building stuff for? How confident are you that you're building stuff for? And some of them might, and that's okay. That's a question to kind of to ponder, because a design researcher can definitely help with that. But then also do we understand the experience of that really, really well in a holistic manner? Because I think one thing that a design researcher can do, talking about being kind of that glue, is we can kind of stitch together certain experiences and communicate that in a way that maybe people within isolated product teams might not be able to, purely because they're working on a specific thing, where we can maybe take a holistic picture to go, this whole experience stitched together looks like this, which is something that can be quite hard without a dedicated research team to be able to do. And ultimately, if we can understand that better, hopefully we'll get, better sales, better retention, all those kind of fun business metrics that we kind of care about as well. And I think that's the other kind of piece of advice I'd give other design researchers and designers, I guess, as well, is being a bit more comfortable in speaking that kind of business language and learning some of the kind of basic lingo that does get used, and being comfortable in saying that back through your research as well. Particularly if you're working with kind of more senior executive type people, I think that's the cut through that you can kind of get the special sauce that might be missing sometimes. So definitely lean into that a little bit more.
Seems to be a common thread that designers need to start speaking a little bit more business language to be able to communicate back to the business the value of what that design brings. And that was amazing. I really appreciate your time today. I think there was some really good insights into design research and how to build a practice, I think, or how to show, if you are a researcher, the value you add back to the business. So really appreciate it today. Now, if I was a researcher and maybe wanted to connect and ask any questions, what's the best way of doing that? Just via LinkedIn?
To myself?
Yes.
You mean? Oh, yeah, sure. LinkedIn's probably...
You're probably the place for it.
Yeah, definitely happy to chat on LinkedIn if you're interested. Yeah, definitely feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Ioanis, once again, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.